Okay, here we are. Chapter 11 is the beginning of Part 3, which deals with theatrical production. Part 3 has chapters that deal with theatrical space and production design. There's a chapter on playwriting and dramaturgy, a chapter on directing and producing, acting, scenic design, costume design and makeup, and lighting design. Focus of this screencast will be on Chapter 11, Theatrical Space and Production Design. Okay, here we go. I think it's really important, and as you read through the chapter, you'll recognize this, that the space in which the performance is created will have a big influence on the audience's response to that space and to the whole play. Some of the factors that will influence audience response are the degree of formality of the space. Now we're talking about the space here, the size of the venue, and the arrangement or configuration of the venue. All right. So there are 4 common physical arrangements of the performance and audience relationship. The proscenium arch theater, the thrust stage, the arena stage, and the flexible space, often called a black box theater. We'll break down these spaces and talk about each one a little more specifically and individually. So with the proscenium stage, you'll see in this silly little diagram that the audience's relationship to the stage is sort of straight on. Think of a classic proscenium stage, the proscenium being a picture frame, and it's like you're sitting at home in front of your big flat screen TV. It's like you're sitting in a movie theater. Okay, that's the audience to the actor relationship. In a thrust space, you'll see that the audience surrounds more of the main acting area, even though within the context of the thrust stage there is also often a proscenium and a stage house, but we'll talk again more specifically in a slide or two. A little illustration of an arena stage. Think of a sports arena, basketball, whatever, where the audience surrounds the entire performance area on all 4 sides. And then finally, a flexible space, or what I like to call a black box, allows for all sorts of different audience-actor relationships. So, more specifically, the proscenium arch stage. This is probably the most common theatrical performance space that you see, especially here in the States. It's a raised platform. It is framed by a proscenium arch. Sometimes it's a decorative frame, sometimes it's just simply an opening. There is this clear division between the stage and the audience. Often, though, there is an apron that breaks that 4th wall, that proscenium arch, that window frame, if you will, into the stage house. And many contemporary directors will bring the action down onto the apron. In spaces that are designed for multiple kinds of performance use, musical venues as well as straight drama, if you will, concert venues, etc. That apron can be on a hydraulic lift so that it can become an orchestra pit. It can be lowered to the level of the house to create additional seating opportunities. There's a lot of flexibility in a modern proscenium with an apron. Seating in a proscenium house tends to be on either one level that sort of slopes higher in the back of the auditorium, lower in the front of the auditorium toward the stage. Sometimes you'll have balconies, mezzanine, even box seating. If you've been to the Buell Theater, or the Opera House in Denver, the Lincoln Center Theater in Fort Collins, these are proscenium houses, although the Lincoln Center definitely has a modified apron. Let's see, where are we? Stage design, right, is intended to be seen from the front only. And usually in a proscenium house, above the stage house section itself, is a fly system, which helps facilitate the changing of scenery, the manipulation of lighting in the theater, draperies for masking, etc. And there's often offstage space at the sides of the stage. These areas are called the wings, and in an ideal world, the depth of the wings are at least half the width of the stage, so that if you have large wagoned scenic elements, they can be rolled completely off stage and clear, so the audience does not see them when they aren't intended to be seen. The thrust stage is very much like a proscenium stage. Think about the apron having sort of a thyroid problem, right? It's grown quite enormous. Although most thrust stage theaters do have a proscenium arch and a small stage house, but the stage house now, instead of being the principal acting area, becomes a secondary acting area, and also allows for facilitating more elaborate backgrounds. The thrust portion of the stage is intended to be the principal acting area. This brings the audience closer to the action and it integrates them deeper into the performance, and allows for a more intimate experience between audience and actor. It does create a challenge for sightlines, because you have audience sort of looking diagonally across the performance space, and as well as straight ahead. So stage design and blocking, the arrangement of the actors in the space, become a challenge. Many thrust stages do not have formal fly systems, although they can have elaborate catwalks or grids above the principal thrust to allow for the management of lighting systems, etc. Scenery is usually shifted manually, although fancy high-end thrust stages, say you've been to the Denver Center to the stage, that's a formal thrust, there can be a series of trapdoors and elevators built into the stage, which will facilitate for scenic changes and magical appearances of characters, etc. An arena stage is a space that is a performance venue surrounded on all four sides by the audience. In many ways, this creates the most realistic acting experience because, once again, I have barking dogs. Apologies. Sorry about the dogs. Oh my goodness. Once more into the breach. So, as I was saying, in many ways, it creates the most realistic opportunities for acting and staging, because the actors are functioning in a fully three-dimensional front to back, side to side kind of environment. It does minimize the amount of scenery that one experiences because of not wanting to block the view of the audience. There are hardly ever windows, doors, walls. Sometimes window frames, door frames are suggested. Usually it's some kind of a floor treatment furniture that help create the environment of a play in a thrust space. Again, no fly system, although there are overhead lighting control systems, catwalks, grids, that sort of thing. And the actors generally move on and off the acting area the same way that the audience gets on and off. Actors and audience share these side corner entrances, if you will. So on their little diagram, imagine this being what they call the vomitoria. There are these entrances on the sides that bring the actors from backstage onto stage. Also can allow audience to come from the lobby into the space to get their seats. Moving on. In a flexible space, anything goes. You can arrange a flexible space as a proscenium space, as a thrust space, as an arena space. You could create an alley kind of an arrangement where the audience is seated on only two sides and the actors perform in very sort of lateral staging. Sometimes if we're looking at staging by folks like Grotowski, it's an environment, multiple environments, and the audience sort of finds their own, it's like guerrilla seating. You find your own seating to observe the action played in one area of the theater. And as the actors finish that scene, they move to another area of the theater. They may displace the audience. It can make for very exciting drama. Now, beyond the performance venue itself, the lobby, the auditorium, the stage house, most theaters have, to some extent, these listed auxiliary spaces. These are areas where the production is supported. Some theater companies, many of these auxiliary spaces are off-site, and things are trucked to the theater. In New York City, for example, most of the major stages, in the theater district do not have their own scene shop or costume shop, etc. They do have control booths, they do have dressing rooms, excuse me, green rooms, etc. But the places where the scenery is built, the places where the costumes are fabricated, those are off-site. Many academic situations, all of these spaces are consolidated into an arts center. And all of them are necessary to one degree or another to successfully support a fully realized theatrical production. As I mentioned before, Jerzy Krotowski, Peter Stein, these folks explored non-traditional spaces. You might call it guerrilla theater, you might call it poor theater, but often they found that less definitely was more, and that the audience and the actors sometimes were not distinguished. Here are some questions you might contemplate. We could even throw those up into the discussion. But we'll move on here because we have limited time. All right, the other part of this chapter talks about collaborative production design and how a team creates the visual aspects of a production. And everybody needs a common vocabulary. So we have, oops, did I skip something? I did. We'll start here instead. We have the language of design. We have, oh my gosh, I've skipped over many things. You're going to think I'm crazy. That's okay. Tell you what, we'll break this into two parts. We will pick up here with part 2 because I've got a lot to say. So let's wrap part 1 on chapter 11, and we'll pick up with part 2 in just a moment.